Hello, listeners. This is Janine
and Kristen
from Henrico Casa. You are listening to our podcast, Vigilant Voices. Living life every day. Hello, and welcome to the Vigilant Voices podcast.
We're happy to have you with us and looking forward to once again chatting about a topic related to the well-being of children. Because when we know more about the challenges facing children and families, we can ensure no child faces continued abuse, neglect, or trauma.
And it's really that whole know better, do better concept.
Yes, and we always want to do the best we can on behalf of the children in our lives.
Absolutely. They need us at our best to help them grow into their best self. And so, Kristen, what are we going to talk about today?
Yeah, so today I'm hoping we can talk through the concept of there being a target child in some abuse and neglect cases. When we're tuned into signs of abuse and neglect, I think it can be confusing if you see a family where one child is maybe showing signs of trauma, but their siblings are not.
Yeah, because I think when we think about that high-level abuse and neglect, we often assume it's an all or nothing kind of scenario, as in, isn't it where it's happening to all and not just one? But and I think if we think of it that way, I guess I worry that people may talk themselves out of reporting suspected abuse because they see signs that seem conflicting to them.
Right. And they may be thinking like, I must be wrong. The other child is doing great, so nothing's going on here.
Right. That can't possibly be abuse or neglect happening in this family because it's just different children.
Yeah. And we're here to say that there most definitely could be something going on in that home. I've been moving our CASA case stories into a database, and in doing so, I've been surprised at how many of our cases have this kind of target child phenomenon.
Yeah, it's sometimes called the Cinderella phenomenon, actually.
Yeah. Oh, I can see why. Cinderella was the target child for her stepmother, right? Yeah. And in the case I wanted to share with everyone today, a little girl named Destiny was the target child for her biological mother's abuse. Her mom had a mental illness, and her mom's demeanor and behavior varied significantly when she was either on or off her medication.
Right.
And when she was off her medication, she physically and emotionally abused Destiny. We heard stories like the mom threw canned food at her when she took showers. Like, I just can't imagine some of these scenarios.
Right.
And probably no surprise to us, right? Destiny's coping mechanism became running away every chance she got.
Right. And I mean, I think that's where we start to picture, fits and rages and then sort of behavior that's up and down. Then Destiny, as a child, doesn't know what to expect, what to do, where to go, but just feels that she has to leave.
Get out, right? And especially since Destiny was the middle child and her mom didn't treat her siblings the same way. Yeah. And so I'm sure there was this added level of confusion and maybe even self-blame going on.
What's wrong with me? Why am I getting this behavior? And that confusion actually, I mean, just to be honest, carried over to the CASA advocate involved with this family because she was initially baffled. How could one child be suffering in this way while the other two children in the home seem to be thriving and doing just fine?
Yeah, it really is difficult to imagine, but we've seen, scenarios where abuse is targeted towards just one child.
And, we also see a multitude of ways that people describe these. And so maybe these are also some familiar terms, target child, but the Cinderella phenomenon, but black sheep of the family, right? That's where, Yeah,
you hear people say that all the time. And recently I've seen the phrase scapegoating. Yeah. Our family is great except for this one child who's to blame for everything.
Right. And regardless of the term that's used, it is abuse or neglect, depending on, the facts. But one scenario where we've seen this happen often is in blended families.
Yeah, kind of like Cinderella.
Oh, right. True. But, when two families come together, there can be that rub or a clash between a parent and a stepchild.
Yeah, and we've also seen it happen where a child becomes a target because they remind a parent, maybe even subconsciously, of a person or an experience that was negative.
Right. A child that, let's say, resembles physically, an ex-partner, or a child whose demeanor is like a deceased partner, or a child is born from rape or incest. You can kind of see maybe where some of that behavior could be different.
Sure. And these are all examples of situations where a parent may see a child as a reminder of something they kind of want to forget.
Right.
And so that child becomes the victim of abuse or neglect because there's anger and hurt directed at them through no fault of that child's own.
Right. And sometimes it's not quite that clear or overt.
Good point.
Those are really good, clear examples. But yeah, sometimes children remind their parents of someone through characteristics that the parent may just really dislike.
Yeah.
My son is lying just like his uncle, right? Or scenarios like that. And so that parent overreacts to a situation because it triggers those maybe negative memories or experiences that were with someone else altogether, but they're then attaching that to that child.
Right. Good point. And we've seen, the oldest child be a target. They're expected to be the caretaker for the younger ones, or maybe they kind of intervene and accept the abuse, thinking that they're saving the others from it.
Right. And then, we've also seen the younger children be targets because, the parents have this outlook that these little ones can't keep up with what is expected of them.
Yeah. And actually last year, we sadly saw a middle child die in a situation like this. Physical abuse by her parent led to this death, while the other two siblings were noted by their teachers to show no signs of abuse or neglect and be thriving in terms of development and school participation.
And that is just hard to wrap your head
really
around.
Is.
And it really is baffling. And so as you can imagine, gosh, it must be so demoralizing to be a quote unquote target child.
Right.
So there's already enough trauma generally in abuse and neglect. But then in addition, to grapple with it only being you as compared to other children in the home really is an added complexity.
Yeah, it's got to feel isolating, right? Like these children, I'm assuming, feel very much alone, probably feel devalued. They might feel shame.
Yeah, and I can understand that. But it's not their fault because really any child could be the target of an unhealthy parent or unhealthy parenting practices.
Yeah, so there was an article in Psychology Today last fall, and I'm going to link to it in our show notes, that really drove home this point. Parents choose which child to target, right? And it's perhaps consciously or subconsciously, and it's no fault of the child's. It could be a child who's more sensitive than the others, the child who rebels, the one who's more likely to talk back, maybe the one who's physically smallest and weakest, and so on.
Interesting. And I know now that you're talking about this, like the article that you're referencing, and it did make a really good point about the parents in these cases. And the parents then are able to minimize their own responsibility by then putting the blame on the child.
Right. The victim.
Right. Whom then it turns into, abuse, and they're, those children are being abused. And so it's toxic. And then it puts them in control of the family narrative.
Yeah, it's most definitely toxic. And in Destiny's story, her family had a long history with the court system and the child welfare system. Her mom would have periods where she was healthy and all would be well. And then she would take a turn for the worse and begin abusing Destiny again. And then Destiny would either run away or maybe be removed from the home. Then things would settle down and the mom would be better. But then her mental illness would arise and things would be bad for Destiny again. But through all these ups and downs, Destiny's CASA advocate was there for her. And I know that she fielded more than one emergency call.
Oh, well, that makes me happy that Destiny could call someone.
Right, for sure. And her advocate was also instrumental in coordinating therapy and in-home sessions with the entire family.
And, we've mentioned Cinderella. So is there a fairy tale happy ending here for Destiny?
Not yet. Destiny's siblings are reunited with their mother, but Destiny's advocate doesn't quite trust that Destiny would be safe reunited in that home since she was the target child, right? Things were a little different for her. And so at this time, no other relatives or friends have been identified as able to raise Destiny. So her advocate and the Department of Social Services are looking for other placement options.
But what's wonderful about this story, right, is that Destiny's advocate has a seat at the table involved in planning for her future.
Yeah, I'm thankful for that too. And we're still holding out hope for Destiny to have everything she needs, everything she wants, everything she dreams of for the future.
Absolutely. And, we've certainly shared that sometimes it is difficult to talk about these stories. Right? They can be emotionally tough to hear, and there isn't always that perfect happy ending.
Right.
But the stories are so important to us and to you, listeners, because we want you to better understand family dynamics and see how abuse and neglect can play out in so many different ways. And we need to see it in order to be able to put a stop to it.
Right. And on that note, our call to action today is to read a book titled A Child Called It. Trigger alert. It's a really difficult story.
This is a tough one
to digest. It really is. But the stories that are most difficult to read are also sometimes the most inspiring, right?
It really is a must read. It is the story of Dave Peltzer, who as a boy survived a childhood of targeted abuse until he was rescued from his home at the age of 12. And his experience was actually one of the worst cases that have been documented of child abuse in the history of California.
Yeah. I just remember being shocked when I read it.
Yeah.
But his resilience makes it worth the read. But I think it's also important to read to see how a parent can so directly focus their own issues and their own frustrations onto, a helpless child.
Yeah, that's right. And I think that's true. And yes, in this particular case and story, Dave's resilience is absolutely astonishing. And his ability to move past the truly horrors of his childhood and build a life of service to others is so inspiring. So be sure to read it.
Yeah, and then share your thoughts with us. Thank you for listening to Vigilant Voices, Henrico Casa's new podcast. We have a vision for all children to live in safe, healthy homes. You can help us make that happen. Tell a friend about our podcast and find us on social media.
I believe in the better days.